It's not to intimidate you, but it's to provide the opportunity for people that wanted to hear this to participate to watch it later. And someday that may be you. The protocols for the meeting are pretty straightforward. Mute yourself when you're not talking, particularly during the program. Heidi will accommodate you and help you do that if you have a problem. We're going to ask you to put questions in the chat if you can, particularly during the main part of the program. At the end, we'll have an opportunity for live interaction so you can voice the questions. Or we might ask you to clarify a question if it doesn't become clear, but Jim Spitzer will monitor the chat stream and then feed the questions at breakpoints to Adam, so we'll kind of control it that way. The few announcements, but before the announcements, I want to call the member meeting to order. This is a special meeting that we announced in the newsletter and in the email that came out. Its sole agenda is to elect Tom Sipe to the board of directors, and the board of directors has moved and nominated Tom to do that. The bylaws does not require the editor of the newsletter to be on the board, but we have the option to do that, and Tom has an expanded role. Tom has a really interesting background. He lives in Nesquin on the coast. He's a member of the Coastal Carvers as well as the Oregon Carvers Guild. And he's got a superb technical editing background that really fits in nicely with the editorial responsibilities for the newsletter. So he was willing to help, and then he was willing to really help by becoming editor. So Tom and I worked on the newsletter together in January, got that out, but he took over in February and it's now in control. So the way this has to work is that members can vote and non-members can't vote. So I'm going to ask you to, if you are a member, to hold your hand up when I call for, well, first of all, are there any questions for Tom? Tom's bio was written in the January newsletter. So if you need to go back, you may refresh that. So I'm going to ask for a vote and show of hands. If for all those in favor, if you're a member, please hold your hand up. Let's just hold it up again. The reason is I'm scrolling the screen so that when we record it, we can capture the votes. All those opposed, please hold your hand up. Okay. The motion passes. So Tom, welcome to the board of directors.
Thank you.
I will move that the meeting be adjourned, and the meeting is adjourned. We'll hold another annual meeting in May, so we get to do this again. A few announcements. The gathering of the guilds is coming up the first weekend in May, which has turned out to be the Mother's Day weekend. This is a big deal. It's a big deal for the city. It's a big deal for the woodworkers, and it's a big deal for the Oregon carvers. We will be there for the first time. We are not one of the official 6 guilds, but we're going to have a really large booth, a 10 by 25 booth. And there will be a store. We have 10 carver artists who are selling things. There'll be about 140 objects in the store, ranging from relatively simple to really exotic, from Judy Caldwell's, really fantastic mammals that she's done, and what Kelly Stadelman and others. We need help, and we need your help to pull this off. It takes about 20 volunteers to staff it. There are about 5-hour shifts on the Friday and Saturday and Sunday. And there's a program called Sign Up Genius that is used to automate the registration of this, and you'll get a notice of that. And when you do, please consider volunteering. You get trained for a half hour ahead of time. You'll help in the store to monitor that things don't get stolen. You might get help to demo, and in general help to meet and greet potential and current carvers. We're also doing a big project on comfort birds. We're trying to make 100 comfort birds, comfort animals, or comfort objects. And we got some fair number of people working on those. And if you have an interest in learning how to do it and participating either by bandsawing blanks out, by using a Fordham, a micromotor system, or a Dremel, or hand carving them, we need help. So please let me know if that would work for you. The April program is on what we call tools with edges, and that means that a lot of beginners struggle, and some of us not beginners struggle with trying to figure out what tools to buy and where to buy them, what the best ones are, whether the ones that are made in various countries around the world are any good, how the steel holds up, what your favorite styles and types are. So there will be a series of speakers, some of it pre-recorded. Steve Abernathy, Penworthy, the owner of Woodcrafters in Portland, has agreed to share his experience, as well as the store manager at Woodcraft. Both of them are the sponsors. So we'll call on some of you to help out with that. I'll just make a particular that August we'll do a picnic. There will not be a program in August, but we'll do a get together. And that, as far as February 2023 is, that is the 50th anniversary of this carving club. It used to be called the Western Woodcarvers Association, but 50 years is a long time. I met Adam McIsaac about 5 years ago when he taught a course at the Guild of Oregon Woodworkers on carving and the art style of the Columbia River Basin. We carved a ceremonial ladle that had a figure on it. We had adzes and crooked knives and axes and adzes, and it was a lot of fun. And we were not able to follow up with that at the time, but that was sort of my introduction to Adam. And it became really clear that of the roughly 20 different styles of carving that is in our world, that carving in the tradition of the tribals, Indian tribal customs in this Northwest is a big deal. There are a lot of people that do that in various forms, and Adam is master of this area, so it became a natural for him to be the speaker. A few of us visited him in his shop in December. We walked through a bunch of things. We have some video that we shot of that, and that'll be some auxiliary after extra credit kind of things. If you want to look at it later, we'll try to make that available. But tonight it's an interview. It's not an interview. It's an introduction and overview of the carving of the Columbia River Basin. Adam's been at it for 30 years. He makes a living at this. This is a big deal for him. He's got a fantastic studio. And after tonight's program, I'm hoping there will be interest. We expect that there'll be interest. He has taught and will teach for us any number of workshops, including tool making and carving, beginning or advanced. And he's also willing to host anybody that wants to do serious work with him. He's very busy. He's got a lot of stuff going on. So we're very lucky to have him, and I want to thank him for that. He's assisted tonight by his daughter, who will handle part of the if you will, the camera on his phone as we start the program. We have a whole series of photographs after the first 10, maybe 10, 15 minutes after Adam talks about tools. We'll walk through a slideshow, and that will become the basis for him to talk about the various things that he's carved. And we'll take pauses as we go through those and ask, have an opportunity to ask questions. So, Adam, I assume you can hear me. So you have the mic. So you
can everybody hear me?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. Oh, well, thanks, Larry, for that introduction. And hello, everybody. Larry, did you want me to just say a little bit about myself before we go into the tools then? Or
yeah.
So yeah, I've been carving for 30 years. I've really only been making a living at it probably for about 20. I first got interested in it while practicing just basic Aboriginal life skills and traveling around to various Aboriginal life skill rendezvous and schools in Canada and Idaho and Oregon and Washington. And that's kind of how I got turned on to the wood carving once I started studying the indigenous living skills of the native people on the Northwest coast. They had that great carving tradition. And I started doing it on my own. And then I realized, there was a lot to it. a lot of different styles, a lot of ways that you could do it right or you could do it wrong. And so I started I just started writing letters to all the artists that I knew that were making a living at it, that were doing it a lot, and writing them, telling them I wanted to learn. And, you know, long story short, I kind of started working with Dwayne Pasco up in Paulsbo, and hung out, worked with him for a couple of years. I worked with James Bender. And then, you know, just 5 or 6 years ago, I went and did a big job with Dwayne, and I've worked with Steve Brown and even Bill Holm. And recently, you know, as far as making a living at the art, it's been mostly in the public art world, and it's been working with the tribes. So out of the two of those, I was able to carve out a living for the last 20 years or so. But I've taught wood carving and tool making and design for the Confederated Tribes, the Grand Ronde, the Chinook, and Shoalwater Bay tribe up there in up on Willapa Bay, Shoalwater, Willapa Bay area, and worked for them for 15, 16 years on and off. I haven't been up there for quite a while, maybe 3 or 4 years now. I do a lot of work for Qualicess Studios, who is Sean Peterson. He's Puyallup. I carved a couple of house posts, one for the Puyallup's new Emerald Queen Casino, was that 2 years ago? And then just a couple of months ago, I finished up a story pole for the Seattle Children's Hospital that was commissioned. Sean Peterson got the commission, and then he hired me to do the work, carve his design in the log. So I do a lot of work with the natives. Pretty much, if it wasn't for them, I most likely wouldn't get to do or be doing what I'm doing today. So I don't know how long you want me to ramble on with that kind of stuff, but
why don't you just, we'll let other people ask questions for more detail if they want.
Okay.
Why don't
Any
you talk about your studio and, you know, how it came to be and kind of what it looks like.
So yeah, I live out in the center, Washington. I just basically built a 30 by 40 shop. It's got an awning on it. I can pan around and show you some just kind of what it looks like if I switch the camera on this thing. Let me see. So, you know, the main room is 30 by 30, and it's got all kinds of stuff going on all over the place. Yeah, I like to hunt elk. I've raised 3 kids on elk meat. But, you know, drawing table, designs, you know, this is workbench with a bunch of various tools that I think we're going to get in and talk about. So I won't spend too much time talking about them now. Do a little bit of silver engraving and silver work and more chisels and things. But there's plenty of room here. It's warm and it's dry. We do most of our carving on wooden stumps, so there's not a lot of work benches. You know, unlike European carving where you would put it in a vise and take a chisel and a mallet. You know, we pretty much carve on our laps and on wooden stumps, and I think we'll do a little bit of demonstrating that here when we get going. What now? What?
Well, why don't you talk about your beginning journey with making tools?
Okay, yeah. Happened. So when I first started wanting to carve and went up and started working with Dwayne, of course, he's, you know, he told me if you really want to be a carver, a true wood carver needs to make his own tools. And he sent me home with some steel blanks, 01 tool steel. And he said, make these tools. And then he gave me like a little blueprint of a Bella Coola Indian mask, said, carve this mask and then call me back. So I went home, and we can talk about making the tools when we're looking at them. But anyways, I filed out these tools, heat treated them, annealed them, and did all the stuff, and made 3 knives that were able to carve wood without anybody really. He only verbally explained to me what to do. And So then I hacked out this atrocious looking mask and went up there, and he was like, okay, that's good enough. And I began carving masks, and he would carve the right side and I would carve the left side, or I would carve the left side and he would carve the right side. And that went on for probably about a year, but it was really hard to learn, or I struggled trying to learn Northern style art because there wasn't a lot of Northern style art around here. And so I gradually kind of moved away from doing Northern style art and working with Northern artists, and came down and started studying more of the Columbia River stuff. That's kind of how that transition started. But the tools make they play a really vital role in the carving, you know, because your carving tools, the way that you form them and you shape them, kind of relates to your style and how you carve. Like I have certain tools that I use for carving rib patterns on Columbia River style stuff. I have certain knives for carving eye shapes and eyelids or cheek planes and things like that. And so he was right, you know. Tool making is a big part of carving for sure. Somebody asked the question to my.
Yeah.
And what is the difference between Northern style and Columbia River style?
Style art?
Yes. The
Well,
northern coastal style and Columbia River style.
Well, you know, we're going to get to that with some pictures. And so I don't know if that's the time to answer that. Larry, do you want to do you want me to do any more of this introduction stuff?
Yeah, just wait until we'll pick it up at the end. Is Dwayne a big deal? Is he important to know? What is his last name again, and where does he fit in?
Well, you know, Dwayne Pasco is a man that started carving back in the early 70s when there wasn't really anybody doing it. There may have been, you know, there was some guys maybe like Robert Davidson or Bill Reed. There was a couple native guys doing it. Dwayne, he lived in Paulsbo. He was actually going to, where was he going? He was going somewhere in Europe. He wanted to be a boat builder. So he was going over to Europe to study boat building, and went to a museum and saw some Northwest Coast Indian art. He said, I just looked at it in the museum and fell in love with it, and basically booked a flight home, came home and never looked at boat building again, and just started carving. But I guess he's, you know, his claim to fame is he was one of the first guys that did it. And he's really, really, really good. He's probably one of the best Northwest Coast Indian artists to ever live, really, especially in this, you know, this century. But
that's why I asked the question, because he really was. For people that don't know him, and I didn't know him, and I can't say that I do. You were mentored by a really important person in this.
Yeah, so he instills in his students, because he was also had a reputation for teaching. I was at a gallery, I can't remember, it was up in San Juan Islands, I think, and I was just a kid, and I was asking around looking at galleries, and the owner of the gallery said, oh, you know, I said I really wanted to learn how to carve, and the owner of the gallery said, oh, here, call this guy Dwayne. And I didn't call him, I wrote him a letter. You know, there's no cell phones or anything back then, and so I just wrote him a letter, took some pictures of what I did, what I was doing on my own. And he said, you know, come up. And that's kind of when the tools thing started making. But he's really a traditionalist. Like, he instilled a lot of just really high-end traditional values in the styles in which we carve. You know, he's very protective of it. And, you know, if you're not doing it right and you're not doing it the way that he feels it should be done, he just send you right on down the road. I mean, he had, at the time that I got to go in and work with him, he was working with another kid my age, David Franklin. But David told me he had like a list of 100 people that had wrote him letters or called him that year wanting to come up and, you know, learn from him. So it was a really honor to have him, you know, return my letter and invite me up to his house and teach me some things about wood carving.
Okay.
Go ahead.
So let's just switch gears. Why don't you show us your tools, the tools that you use, and maybe how you use them a little bit?
Okay. I'll tell you what, I think I think if I hold these up, can everybody just see this right here? If I
Yes,
hold
that
this
works.
up?
That works fine.
And then when I go to carve with them, I'll have Chloe hold the camera. But, you know, there's a couple of tools that are really distinct. Well, I guess they're all pretty distinct, but on the northern end of the spectrum, say north of Washington State, they used a tool like this, which is called an elbow adze. And it's made from a branch of a tree. This would have been the trunk. This would have been the branch. And then, of course, you have your adze handle or your iron on there. This particular adze blade right here is a Kestrel made lip adze. So it's cupped on the edges so that it clears cross grain really well. Hold on, let me just grab one more. And so this is an adze that I made. This is the type of adze that we generally make in tool making classes. Of course, here you go. You have the trunk of the tree and the handle. This was I think this was an alder, and then this adze blade is just straight. It's called a straight adze. And adzes are made for like heavy reduction. A lot of times we'll call them a bandsaw on a stick. So this is the tool that you grab if you're going to rough something out really quick and really fast. The steel that we use for these blades, you can use old leaf springs, or I believe that this one in particular was just a piece of 01 tool steel. I like to use 01 tool steel because it's got a lot of carbon in it. So these are more northern style tools. And then as you come down on the coast, southern, say Washington State, southern Canada, it's hard to say exactly. I mean, you'll see, this is called a D adze. I should get to that. This is a D adze, you know, it looks kind of like a D, but you would hold it in here. And traditionally the blades were made out of old axe heads. Now, I say northern style versus southern style, and that's just kind of the thought of where they had originally originated. But a D adze and an elbow adze, you could have found being used throughout the entire coast. I mean, there's adzes all over the world, but so that's a D adze, and we have the elbow adze. And then for more detailed work, we use what is called a crooked knife. And you use various bends. You can see the bend on this one, and this is a U-wood handle. So that would be for maybe the bend on this knife would be used for just general carving. And then we use more of an aggressive bend for hollowing. So you would use this for hollowing out a bowl or a spoon or a ladle or a platter or the back of a mask or something like that. And then we use straight knives for detail work. I find that you do a lot of carving with the straight knife. I find the straight knife in my hand probably, 90% of the time, really. It just depends on what you're doing, but it's my favorite tool. And of course, once you start to make your own tools and develop your kind of style and you see how they all work together, you can get all kinds of different bends. You can get, this is more of like a planing blade. It doesn't have a very aggressive curve on it, but this would be for carving planes and facets and things like that. Chloe, if you want to come and hold the camera for a minute, I'll show you some of the tools and how you'd employ them here. All right, can you get me there? So, this elbow adze here, I'll use the one that I made. So the straight elbow adze, this is just a piece of birch, but you would use it, carve different planes and different facets, and chop with it. Same with a D adze, use it the same way. The D adze is really a hogging tool. Generally it's not quite as like gosh, the word that's coming to mind is like more petite. It can still be precise, but it's got a lot of heft to it. So it's generally used for something that's really big and heavy, a bigger, heavier carving. You wouldn't want to use this, you know, if I had this little rattle that I've been working on, like, you know, I'm not going to sit and really carve with the D adze, whereas like, you know, the elbow adze is so petite or so careful that precise, I guess is the word, is that, you know, I could sit here and basically use this whole adze to carve that handle. Now I wouldn't, because the knife is better, but you could if this was the only tool that you had. In fact, you could carve an entire mask with an elbow adze and never use a knife once if you really wanted to. And then the crooked knives are like, you hold them palm up in your hand. And like I said earlier, you know, European carving, you would have had that thing mounted up on some sort of a vise, you know, but everything on the coast, not everything, but a lot of the times when we carve, we use our legs as our workbench, and we hold it down with our forearms, or we pinch it between our legs like that. But the knives, you know, I don't know if you can see that. They're kind of done, they're, you know, you can take pretty good chunks with it. The other thing is the majority of the carving on the Northwest coast was all done in greenwood. So you can see this is a kind of a spalted piece here. It's got a little bit of moisture in it, but not a ton, but it still carves pretty good. You know, you can take that thing and go right to work carving, you know, whatever you wanted. So you can pull that knife along the wood, you can push it along the wood, you can cross grain it. And so yeah, green wood, it just carves better. It's just a lot nicer to carve. If this thing was bone dry, it would just be super hard. Now I say green wood, but you know, carving cedar, really super nice cedar, it carves pretty darn good wet or dry. I'll show you, this is a mask that I've been working on, and it's old growth red cedar. I've been drying it out in the freezer because it slowly dries it. You can see there was a little bit of a check coming on here, but it never, I'm not too worried about it making it into the mask itself. I was able to put it in the freezer and slow it down. I have these spreader bars in here because a lot of times it'll curl. But you know, for this mask, you could imagine as a block of wood, I would have taken this elbow adze, and the first thing I would have done was carve a half cylinder. And then I would have carved all these planes and facets. You know, there would have been a forehead plane that came back here. And then I would have shot that brow back. Then there would have been a temple plane. Then I would have pushed a forehead back, another temple plane, and a cheek plane, and then a mouth plane. And from this brow ridge, you go down with the pupil plane, and then from the pupil, you push back the orb. So every one of these planes relates to each other. So if this brow ridge would have been off or cattywampus, it would have determined how this eye turned out, because everything just builds off of each other systematically. You just go down, boom, 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 boom. And depending upon the style of mask, you would have cheekbones located. For instance, this Bella Coola mask, it's got these cheekbones way back here. It's got this really deeply carved conical shaped orb. It's got the corner of the brow, the pupil, and the corner of the mouth all kind of line up. So there's all different, you know, depending upon whatever style of carving you're doing, whether it's Bella Coola or Quagulth or Tsimshian or Haida or whatever, there's all little embellishments or different ways of doing it. They all look a little bit different. But you would have came in here to carve this eye, you know, you would have done a big stop cut. It's kind of hard to see it now by the way it is, but you would have done a big stop cut with these straight knives, and you would have beveled it back like that, or you could, clean up your forehead. So basically all the rough in, this thing was all roughed in green. And then when it's dry, I'll come back with these knives and I'll do all my finish work, because there's no sanding in Northwest Coast Indian art. You try never to sand. You can sand if you want the sanded look, but outside of that, you never sand. I was taught you never sand. So you have to get your knives extremely sharp, and you have to have good wood, and then everything is just a buff carved finish, unless you want to sand it though. Before I could ever get a carving to be knife finished, I would have to carve a mask, sand a mask, carve a mask, paint a mask, carve a mask, sand a mask, and paint a mask. Like every single one. I could never do it on my first try. I had to do, maybe 2 or 3 different times. I would have to carve all the paint off that I did, re-sand it, knife finish it, because it was such a progression of learning how to make a tool, get it tempered right, to even be sharp enough to do a knife finish. And then you'd paint the thing, and it really highlighted all the mistakes and all the things that were wrong. And so, man, you dig in there, you'd recarve it again. But that's the kind of thing that Dwayne would have you do. It was just like you had to do it over and over and over again until it's absolutely perfect, because you're representing somebody else's culture, a different art form. And the way that you work these masks down, at any given point you could stop and it's a completed mask. Like every plane as you work it down is perfect in every way, so that at any time you stop, it's a completed carving. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So I'm just
back to
babbling now, but
back to tools. Could you point out a few basic tools again that
yeah. So like if somebody wanted to come and make a set of knives, or if I would suggest what to get, you'd want to make a straight adze like that for blocking out masks. You'd want to make a straight knife like that, just basic old straight knife. You'd want to make some sort of a planing blade or a general purpose knife that doesn't have a huge crook on it like that. And then you'd want to make a hollowing blade like that. This planing blade would be used for getting in here and shaping these cheeks, shaping under the lip. It would come in here and it would kick this forehead all back. You could do a lot. You could do the orbs, you could do whatever. But basically 3 knives. Those are the 3 knives I made when I started working with Dwayne, made an adze. And then from there, sky's the limit. Then you're making like little detailed knives, little teeny detailed knives. That's like, in order to really be proficient at it, you can't really just say, what tools do I buy? Because nobody makes them. I mean, Kestrel Tools makes some really nice, cool carving knives, and they work great, but you're going to want more. That just depends on what you end up doing. I use tons of chisels. Chisels have their place. I like to buy old chisels and retemper them and regrind them and things like that. I have several of those that I've redone. But the tool making is a really big part of it. Like I say, though, you could buy 3 really nice tools from Kestrel Tool on Lopez Island and totally be able to carve a mask or a totem or whatever. The thing that I like about my tools is, I don't know how to say this. Kestrel makes them and they're really hard. The steel is super, super hard because, he doesn't know who's going to be using them or what they're going to be used for. So they got to be able to take on any type of wood. So if you were to take a Kestrel tool and you were to take one of my tools and just start hacking through a big hard knot without like really good technique, you'd probably break it or chip it, ding it up. It would be, you could have a really good chance of ruining the knives that I make. But you could take a Kestrel knife and you could just hog right through anything and it wouldn't check, or it wouldn't crack, it wouldn't chip. But they're super hard to sharpen. So that's kind of the drawback. That's the other thing. Like I can carve with this knife. I can get this knife sharp and I can carve for 100 hours with it and only maintain the edge with a leather strop just by stropping it, and then not even need to go and sand it with my sanding paper. Here, I'll show you. So I just take B-weight sandpaper and you wrap it up on a dowel. And I should have these all rubber band, but I don't anymore. And it's just kind of like playing a fiddle, you know, you ride that bevel up. And then when it gets time to do really, really intricate finish work, yeah, you buff it out, you get it super sharp. But like this thing is always like, it's just, they're always really sharp. It's just a little bit softer so that you can take that burr that builds up and strop it off and just keep carving and strop it off and keep carving, or grab a 400 and a 600 grit rod and hit it really quick. Kestrel knives are harder knives. You'd have to grind away at a lot harder. He likes to use slipstones, ceramic slipstones and things. I like sandpaper because it never gets clogged up. As it wears out, it gets finer and finer and finer. And I just grab a new sheet, roll it on there, have a brand new fresh 220, rather than, you know, taking Japanese stones and rubbing them together, or, you know, cleaning ceramic stones with, I don't use them, so I don't know what you clean them with, but I just know they get clogged up and quit working. And I'm not trying to knock on Kestrel tools. They're great. Like the Kestrel tool, that guy's a total blacksmith and metallurgist and would, you know, make a tool that way better than I could. But the tools I make, I know how to make them. I know how to use them. I know how to maintain them, and they're an integral part of what I do.
So Adam, let's take a break here. Let's see about questions. Jim,
Yeah.
are there any questions that?
Yes, Adam, can you describe what the blades are made of for the crooked knives?
Yeah, so if Chloe wants to follow me over here. So I should have had those laid out too. I spaced that. I knew somebody was going to ask me that. I have some blank ones here. So there's different steels. There's 01 tool steel. The best steel is old industrial bandsaw blades. They're super, super hard to get, but that has the highest carbon in them. But you can go down to like Portland or Pacific Tool Steel in downtown Portland and buy some 01 tool steel that looks like this. Grind this profile into it, right? And then I'll just put it on a workbench kind of like this. I mean, I would make it a lot nicer, but just for the demo. And then I just take a mill bastard file and I just ride up that until I get about a 22-degree bevel on each side with the file. And then you take that and you would do all the sharpening on both bevels on a block of sandpaper like this until they're both razor sharp. And then we just heat them up. And you have a pair of pliers and you heat this up going red. And then instead of starting flat and walking it up, you start from the tip and you push down, and that bends it, right? And then you throw it in the forge, you heat it up to a nice cherry red, quench it in oil, in vegetable oil. And the thing that's cool about 01 tool steel is it's like self-tempering, and you're done. And if you make, 5 or 10 tools, you might have 1 or 2 that doesn't quite work out as well as the 7 or the 8 that are. It's the steel that you get these days. I had a batch of bad steel that just didn't really work out very well for me. That's like I say, if you can get that old bandsaw blade that's like a 1/16 of an inch thick and then you cut it into 1/2-inch strips, it just makes the best knives, but they're just getting harder and harder to get. But that's pretty much how it is. It's super easy and it's super cheap. It was before I ever sold any carvings. I sold thousands of dollars worth of knives because every Aboriginal life skill rendezvous I went to teach wood carving at, I would sell, as many knives as I had. I just would make knives and sell them as fast as I could. Everybody would want one, and they worked. So, and the thing that was cool is, you know, I was going to college, I didn't have any money. You could go buy a bar of steel from Pacific Tool Steel, or you could get some old bandsaw blade. You could go buy, you know, a $10 file and some sandpaper, and you could make a knife for, you know, $5 or $6 by the time you make 10 of them or whatever. And, you know, you sell them for 75, $80 a piece all day long, as many as I could. So I did hundreds of those and taught tool making classes for years in Grand Round and just all over. Does that answer your question? If I get babbler, you just gotta, I'm kind of trying to relive everything as I talk.
Another
And
question.
I hate
Adam.
talking about myself too, Larry. So you got me into that.
Go ahead, Jim.
And another question from Larry Wade. How long does it
Yeah.
take how long does it take to dry a mask that was carved green?
Good question. So this mask, to get to this point from a block of wood, was, I'd say, 20 hours. And it has been in the freezer for, I think, a week now. But here's the deal is, if you were to take this mask and hollow it all the way out, you could, and get it super thin everywhere, you could skip the freezer part and not put it in a plastic bag and let it air dry in, you know, a couple of days. I've taken them and stuck them in the microwave before, because, you know, I'm sure everybody knows what, you know, wood checks, because you got that outer rind that dries around the inner core, right, of wet wood, and it stresses it. So if you relieve all that stress from the inside, it dries pretty fast and pretty even. So, you know, it just kind of depends on how thin you get it, what the ambient moisture is around outside or whatever, you know. Like, I try to do it slow. Like, you know, we'll see what this crack looks like here in the next, you know, couple of minutes. If it starts creaking up there, it hasn't moved for a week, so I think it's going to be pretty stable right there. But yeah, so I couldn't say exactly how long, but I'd say, if you carved it relatively quick and you hollowed it out fairly thin, say, you know, ½ inch or under everywhere, you could just, in a couple of days, it'd dry out. And it just depends on how much water. I guess if it's green, and alder, you know, cedar and alder, they all dry a little different. The thing that's really nice about alder, so if this was an alder mask, that crack would go away as soon as it dries. Alder has a real tendency, we always call it the forgiving wood, because I've had masks with huge cracks in them, and when it's finished drying, it closes up when it settles. Cedar doesn't tend to do that as much. But
And a related question, Adam, do you have a favorite wood that you prefer to carve?
yeah, it would just have to be old growth cedar. It's the best. But, you know, after a while, you kind of get tired of it, and you're like alder, because your tools don't have to be quite as sharp as they do to carve cedar. And you can just carve any old piece of alder. But yeah, old growth cedar is the cream, but it's getting super hard to get. Really hard. Like, just to get a piece of wood like this to carve a mask is probably, I don't know, at least $100, maybe more, by the time you went and got it. I mean, I get a lot of it up in the Hoods Canal. It costs $100 to drive up there and back. And I know a guy in Portland that sells it for $30 a board foot or linear foot. So it's spendy.
Are there some difficult woods that you would that are particularly difficult, but you choose them because of the grain?
Yeah, well, that's it. I would say that they all are good to carve. It just depends on the grain. You know, if you got a really nice piece of VG, it's going to carve great. You know, if you get into some swirly grain cedar, it's been a nightmare too. I like yew wood. It's fun to carve. If it's nice and straight, you know, you can quarter saw it and get it really good. But I'd say it all it all carves pretty much the same. Yellow cedar's really nice. It doesn't hardly matter what the grain's doing in a piece of yellow cedar or Port Orford cedar, but it's hard to get to. Ash is really hard just because it's super hard. And so, you know, if you're sitting there carving on a piece of wood, you know, to use a straight knife, you know, you pivot it on your thumb, you know, that's pretty nice and soft. But you go to carve ash or yew wood or maple or something, boy, by the end of the day, your thumb right there, you can't even touch it. You know, because it's just, but you can see that nice buff shine that knife's leaving on that. You can hear it. I mean, that thing is just ripping.
So Adam, I'm going to
That's the
switch.
kind of stuff that I can sit in.
Adam, I'm going to switch gears. Adam,
Yeah. Yeah,
I'm
go
going to
ahead.
switch. I'm going to switch gears, and I'm going to switch. I'm going to switch to the slideshows.
All right, here, let me see, Chloe. All right, thanks, Chloe. Yeah, you can leave now.
I've got two computers going on. Let's see. So I assume everybody can see that slide, which is the introductory slide. And we skip through the tools, and now we've got the slide that's up. Adam is the plank house in Ridgefield. You want to use that as a springboard for talking about both this project and the importance of it in your own career?
Yeah. So the slide that we got, the two pictures on the right and the left are of the Quaff-Laput plank house on the Richfield National Wildlife Refuge. And that was a project that was that was going in 2005 during the Lewis and Clark bicentennial. The project was funded, I think, by ODOT. I can't remember exactly, but this was a big platform for me because I met the Chinook people. Before that, I didn't know any native people. I didn't even think there was any native people around. I can't believe I once thought that. But anyway, so the picture on the far right is the wealth post that's at the back of the house. And then the post in front of that is the parents of the house. And the guy in the back is inheriting the house and becoming the chief. So both those designs here again were drawn by Tony Johnson, who's the Chinook chairman right now. Back then he was working for the Confederated Tribes of Grand Ronde as a linguist. But he designed the posts. I met him. He has it was his uncle who had worked with Dwayne. Excuse me. And so he knew Dwayne. He understood Dwayne's philosophy of carving, and that kind of paved the way for Tony to meet me. And he knew that if I was carving with Dwayne, I was probably looking at art and going about it the right way. Which it's funny because when I was working with Dwayne, I had inquired about Columbia River art or Chinookan art. He said, "Don't ever do it. Don't ever do that stuff. It's way too spiritually loaded," which was exactly right. And we'll get into a little bit of that. But anyways, so I met Tony and I met a bunch of guys from Grand Ronde. I mean, there was like 300 or 400 people working on the plank house. I had just I was just a paid employee to do all the carved all 5 house posts. I built the fire hards, adds texture to all the roof planks, did a ton of work there for, I think it was almost 2 years I worked on that project. But anyway, that really slingshotted me in my art career. I met the natives. I started working on the Confederated Tribes of Grand Ronde a bunch, carving and tool making and design. And I was a major part of their recovery program down there. I would go and work with native guys who were struggling with drugs and alcohol. Anyways, and then the middle picture is a little pseudo kiosk plank house that we just built last year at the Two Rivers Heritage Museum in Camas. And they commissioned me to carve the entry pole that you can see there of the chief of the house with his hands out and two salmon going up alongside it. But that was a really cool project. That's still going on. There's a wealth post in the back, and then I carved a bunk rail and a bunk post, and I'm building some fish drying racks for the inside of that. So that was just recent. I just finished up the bed bunks in it last month. But
I'm gonna go to
yeah.
the next slide.
Sure. Yeah, and if anybody wants to stop and ask me anything, they can too. So these are three frogs. I call it Shwekek's bunk rail, or Shwekek means frog in Chinook. You know, I mentioned earlier that Dwayne had said, you know, don't carve the Chinookan art because it's too spiritually loaded. And when I met Tony Johnson and we carved the plank houses, we both wanted to practice Columbia River art on a public level. You know, I wanted to make a living as an artist and felt drawn to carve it. And two, he really was interested in it because we wanted to try and bring recognition to the Chinook. You know, the Chinook are an unrecognized tribe. But when we sat around and we started talking about, well, how do you take an art form that is made for one's own person and isn't really made to, you know, show and tell, whereas Northern style art is more about, you know, your crest, you know, moieties, phratries, lineages. You want to show everybody, you know, your lineage, where you came from. You want to kind of show it off. Down here on the Columbia River, a lot of it was a Tamanawas art, so it was a spirit power that belonged to an individual. Anyways, you know, we started looking at like Paul Kane paintings and the agate etchings of the interior of Chinook plank houses. And what you saw in a traditional Chinook plank houses was a bunk bed basically that ran along both sides. And the native people would sleep on the top bunk, and the lower bunk would house their personal belongings. But they were oftentimes carved and painted, and we can see those from the old Paul Kane paintings and things like that. And so it was like, well, obviously they were doing some art form that was made for public view. So this is basically a Shwekek's bunk rail. So this could have been a bunk rail that was carved in a plank house. And it's not speaking of someone's specific spirit power, rather it's speaking about Frog. And there's tons of mythology about Frog and the things he did and the things he played a part in up and down the coast. So it was a little bit of a teaching tool and things like that. But that's kind of what's going on with the Shwekek's bunk rail there. I saw a bunch of questions come in.
So, a related question, how large are the bunk rails?
Yeah,
and do you use templates to replicate the design?
Yeah, you know, a lot of times I'll draw the design out and then I'll use tracing paper, and then I'll flip the tracing paper over and trace the back side of it, and it'll transfer the design onto the wood. So for that one, I just, you know, that one I can remember drawing that thing about, you know, 6 inches or so on a piece of notebook paper. And then I kind of blew it up to about 12 inches. And then when I got it to how I liked it, I took it into a blueprint shop and had them blow it up. And then I traced it over with vellum, and then I laid the vellum down on the wood, traced the back of it, and that imposed the image onto the wood, and then cut the top out with the jigsaw. And then I stepped, if you can see in between the arms and the, you know, where the circles are, I just took a plunge router, I dropped that back with the plunge router, and then textured it all with a knife, and then sat there for weeks and carved every one of those concentric circles, which was a nightmare. But yeah,
how large is this piece that we're looking at?
I think that one's like 7 feet long. It's in my living room now. It's like 7 feet by somewhere in that 30-inch tall by 2 inches thick, and it's actually 3 pieces of wood I laminated together. That wood was some salvaged red cedar off of Mount Hood, so it's really cool to get some local cedar.
And I'm looking at the perfection of those circles. You said it was a nightmare to do those with hand tools. I assume you used
Yeah.
a V chisel.
No, I used all a straight knife. That entire thing was carved with the straight knife. I've never used a V chisel on anything or a parting tool.
Wow.
Yeah,
I'd like to see you do that.
you gotta come out for a class.
I think so.
Okay, I'm going to switch slides there.
So this is another example of, this was the migration panel. So this is another frog. So I would say that if you were to go, the first picture, the first frog would be more on the contemporary side, and this would be more on the traditional side of Columbia River art. You know, you could call this a zoomorphic image. It's not, you know, it could be a frog, could be a salamander. It's got a little human face on the back of it. But on the north or on the Columbia River, they carved a lot of images that were really ambiguous. You didn't really know exactly what they were, because that specific you know, creature could have belonged to somebody's own spirit power. They didn't want anybody to know what it was. See, if you got a spirit power, the only time that you displayed it or boasted of it was at the winter ceremony, and then from then on out, for your entire life, it had to be hidden, because if somebody found out about it or saw it, then that spirit would get scared and leave you. And so that's why a lot of this art was made for one's own person, never to be shown, because it didn't fit the bill of like down on the Columbia River, everything was just kind of a nucleus family. They all shared one origin myth. They all lived in houses that were, you know, went down from fathers to grandfathers, things like that. And up north, you had, you know, you had people that wanted to belong to the Raven clan and all these different clans and these different lineages. And if you were to claim a lineage, you had to have a song or a dance. You know, they would call it a prerogative. You wanted to tell everybody who you were and where you were from. But anyways, so that's just basically another bunk rail. That one was, I think that one was 7 or 8 feet long, and I sold that one at the Stonington Art Gallery. I did a show up there, and the guy from California bought it the first night. It's pretty neat. It was like 3.5 inches thick. It was a pretty substantial piece.
So I just switched to
So-
woodpeckers.
Yeah, so this, you know, so it was 5 or 6 years ago, I got a commission through the Washington State Art Commission to carve a bunch of animals for an elementary school up at Lake Stickney, up north of Seattle. And the selection committee liked my art style that was a little bit more contemporary. So, you know, it's contemporary, but it still holds to the traditional values of Columbia River art, you know, with the cheek planes and the forehead planes and the triangles and the chevrons for wings and such. But after carving, you know, so much traditional stuff with the natives and just really, really, you know, digging into it, you just all of a sudden you start to develop your own style within a style, and you start to look at the old stuff and you just kind of clean it up or twist it around a little bit. You don't invent something brand new, but you just kind of clean up what's already been done. You know, I guess with my way of thinking is I've always thought, well, had times treated the Columbia River people, the Chinookan speaking people, where would their art have gone? What would they have been doing today? And so I've always thought that, you know, this is what I think a native artist would have done if their art form was, you know, allowed to continue to grow. You know, I mean, in 2005, when Lewis and Clark came out, you know, they stopped at Blue Lake State Park and there was like 5 or 6 Indians there. And there was a longhouse there that was like 600 feet long or something and 100 feet wide. And there was like half a dozen Indians living there. So their art got hit, their people got hit hard, and it just stopped. And it never went anywhere for 200 years, really. I mean, in 2005, Tony had done a little bit of it. I had carved some panels in up on the Skamania Lodge. Lillian Pitt was doing some stuff, but she wasn't really doing any carving. She was doing, you know, ceramics and things. And so, I mean, I
Adam,
don't
we
want
have
to brag about it, but there was nobody doing it.
Adam,
Yeah.
one person asked whether you do apply a finish to your pieces.
Yeah, a lot of times I'll cover them with benite. And I've also liked this other Dalley's wood stain. Dalley's makes benite, which is a wood conditioner. So you can put that on, and that kind of helps it keeps it from taking on oils and things. Like you can touch it, you can take a wet rag and clean it off. And it also makes it easier. It's like a what do you call that? Like a pre-stain conditioner or something that helps you apply stain. So I like to put some of this benite down, and then I like to go in and kind of shade it and just do different tones of wood and things rather than a lot of paint. But yeah, I use the Dalley's products, and sometimes on the end grain, when you're carving end grain, it's super hard to get it, you know, buffed out really nice. It always wants to look kind of sheeny. So when I'm done carving it, I'll put several coats of teak oil on it sometimes and rub it down, and that kind of dulls up that sheen color. You know, when you carve an end grain, it can kind of be tough. But anyway, somebody asked me if I could explain carving or something like.
Yeah, can you speak about carving horn and stone instead of wood?
Oh yeah. So yeah, hang on one second. Well, I have some horn bowls over there I've made. They're not very exciting, but I took a class with Steve Brown, and Steve Brown's another great big name in Northwest Coast Indian art. He used to be the curator of the Seattle Art Museum. He's written a couple of books. His last book was on the evolution of Northwest Coast Indian art, where he talks about how the art changed with the surfaces that were being painted and carved and drawn as they started to modernize things, kind of. But he's a brilliant man and works a lot up with the Tlingit in Juneau. But I kind of lost my train of thought there. What was that? What were we saying?
Can you talk about carving horn and stone instead?
So horns. Oh yeah. So we were up at Steve's. It's really hard to get sheep horn. In fact, the guys in Grand Round got some horn from the Fish and Wildlife somewhere through intramural trading. And anyway, so the horn carving process is basically you take a horn and you soak it in the toilet. And then you can flush the water and keep it clean, because it starts to rot and get kind of stinky. I mean, you could do it in a bucket anyways. You get it all super soaked up. And once it's super soft and soaked up, you can kind of carve some of the outer rind out. But what it basically is it's a process of taking a sheep horn and putting it in boiling hot water and boiling it for, I can't remember the time. It might maybe like 5-10 minutes, then pulling it out. And it carves like a piece of butter, just the softest thing you've ever carved in your whole life. But you only have about 3 minutes before it dries out or cools off enough. And then it's hard as a rock. And so then you got to put it back into the boiling water. And so it's a process of boiling it, taking it out, boiling it, taking it out, boiling it, taking it out. And all the while you're sticking like round stones, or we had a wood turner turn some wooden spheres, and you're forcing this sphere into the antler to steam it out. And it's the same way if you were going to carve a little bone effigy, you would want to soak that thing until it almost starts to rot and gets really soft, and then you can carve it. But the boiling it really softens it up. But if you got this, like, by the time you're done, you're just a wet mess and your hands are burned. It's like it's fun, but I didn't decide I wanted to sit around and carve horn. Not to mention you just can't get, you know, bighorn sheep horns anywhere. They're worth about $1,000 a pair or more if you can buy them. But
Larry asked, what did you carve at Skamania Lodge? And I'm wondering if he's setting up the next photograph.
Yeah, I carved a couple of panels up there. So I was selling some Northern style masks, little maskettes in their gift store, and they had a budget or got some money for one, I can't remember if it's the West Wing or the East Wing down there by one of the big convention halls. And they asked me to carve a northern form line design, like on a northern style bentwood box. And I said, well, that's not really the type of art that was going on down here. And at the time I hadn't carved any Columbia River art either. So I didn't know what to do, but I knew that wasn't there. That wasn't appropriate. And so I remember I took, I just copied that She Who Watches petroglyph, the Sogaglao petroglyph up there on Horse Thief Lake. And I drew that up and I said, I want to carve this. And they said, okay, yeah, that looks fine. And it was funny because I didn't want to carve that, but I knew if they said yes to that, I could come up with something better. And so then I started looking at all these sheep horn bowls that on the Columbia River, there was a big tradition of horn carving, ladles and bowls. I just basically looked at these bowls. I don't even know if we have a picture on it, Larry, but I thought, well, what would it look like if I took that bowl design and instead of carving it in a round circle or, a bowl, if I flattened it out? Like, anyways, I carved these great big Columbia River style panels that were up there based on their bowls. And I think that was one of the things that Tony had seen me do and was like, well, he's definitely got getting onto it. They kind of look like the one up on the center left with the corona around her head and things. So if you want to concentrate on that picture, there's a central face and then there's three little faces below it. So that's kind of like a Columbia River style power board. And what it's speaking about is this woman in the middle who has got her spirit power, which are the three little humanoid faces on the bottom. And you know that she's a woman because she's pierced her ears. And a lot of Columbia River art, you saw these interlocking bands of triangles around their heads. You saw a lot of these concentric, you'd see concentric circles, rectangles, diamonds. There's all this concentric stuff going on. And the thought is that when a Chinookan would want to do these spirit quests for Tamanawas power. And while they were doing this questing, they would deny themselves food and water, and they would do extremely physical activities. Like, I remember reading once a man was doing a spirit quest down on the Columbia River, and he would paddle out into the river with a giant stone, and he would throw it in the water, and then he would dive down and he would pick it up, swim to the top, throw it in the canoe, get back in the canoe, then throw the rock back into the water. He would do that 5 times after not eating or drinking for 5 days. And if you think about that, you would feel pretty messed up if you hadn't eaten and you were doing that kind of strenuous activity. And that would help them enter into this spirit world where they'd be visited by, any type of creature, who knows what it was. And once they were visited by that creature, they would carve it out. It would come in, or it may come in a song, and they would sing that out during the smokehouse. And then that creature, that spirit, would aid them throughout their entire lives. You might have one that aids you in hunting or fishing. For instance, this one is going to aid this woman in basketry weaving. Those 3 faces down there from like a Wasco basketry design. And so you see a lot of that imagery of that, what's the word I'm looking for? That you'd enter into that spirit world and you'd see stars, and you just kind of like, you could imagine yourself fainting and after all that stuff. And so a lot of that art form depicts that spirit questing. And so you got to be kind of careful with what and how you're carving stuff when you do it. And the reason why I've been allowed to do it is because I've spent, the last decade living on the reservation with these guys and gals.
So related to that, are there any native carvers doing this kind of work today? Question from Diane in Malala.
Yeah, there's, Tony Johnson is brilliant artist. He doesn't do it full time as a living. He's a linguist and he's got another job, but him and I partner up on public art all the time. When I got a couple of my students, Greg Robinson has done some pretty decent stuff. Bobby Mercier's done some cool stuff. Travis Mercier's done some cool stuff. So, there's a handful of people, but there's not a lot of people carving things like Tony and I. Bobby's starting to do a lot more now, but there's a handful of them. I'll tell you what, 10 years ago, when you draw up some of this stuff and go to a public art interview and sit down with the selection committee, the first thing they tell you is that this art doesn't belong here. That looks like Easter Island. You don't know what you're talking about. And they just tell you to leave, or they wouldn't give you the job. And I would sit there with those selection committees with the freaking Chinook Indian sitting next to me, and they tell him the same thing. I mean, people just didn't know it. Had no idea of any of this was going on here. And so, like, in the last, decade of, doing public art, I've done, I don't know how many pieces of public art over Washington and Oregon and Seattle and all over, but it was tough. Now I've darn near put myself out of work, and they call the tribes to go and do it. But they want it. People want it more. They're starting to get starting to get a lot more recognition. But
So
it was
Adam,
tough.
could you take a look at this slide and tell us what we're looking at about how big are they and where are they?
The one you got up here right now?
Yeah.
So the 3 horizontal pieces were 3 door transoms that were carved for the Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife headquarters I think it's in Salem. And here again, they wanted just kind of my art with the little twist of some Columbia River and some not. So I wouldn't say this is super Columbia River stuff. This is just more kind of, Adam McIsaac stuff. But, the one in the middle talks about the 3 types of fishing: sport fishing. There's commercial fishing, sport fishing, and Indian fishing with the Leicester Spear on the right. Those are kind of like the 3 entities that the Fish and Wildlife manage. The other one is the bighorn sheep up on top. And then the bottom one was the two bucks fighting and the eagles there. And the eagles are kind of Columbia River, Northwest Coasty. I mean, it's just all kind of contemporary Adam stuff. A lot of times, if you go into these public art places, it's not appropriate to put a really traditional piece of Columbia River art in, but you can still, do a nice piece of art and have fun with it and not, get too crazy. The carving on the far left. So that's a carving. It was 2 years ago. I got a commission along with Tony Johnson to do a piece of public art for the new Burke Museum that was going to get built on the University of Washington campus, which was a huge thing, and we ended up getting the job. It was a huge thing to get our art at the Burke Museum. The Burke Museum is just kind of a pinnacle, or to be represented by the museum. They have a huge Native American collection. They're super, super involved in Northwest Coast Indian art. Bill Holm was there. Anyway, so it was extremely validating to have them be like, no, we want your guys' art there. We want to see your art in the front of the Burke. And so I came up with this installation, which was going to be a series of canoe paddles that would be arranged in the shape of a canoe. They're going to be standing vertically. You'll see them in another picture. But it basically would welcome people to the museum, and you would walk through the middle of them to go in the front door of the new Burke Museum. And on each one of the paddles, you see icons from Columbia River art mythology. And that picture back there was Blue Jay and his sister that he's always flying to the land of the dead to try and get his sister. But that's kind of it there. And it was a really cool project because I carved all those paddles. drew those designs. Tony designed a couple of them too. I think we split it 50-50 on the design. I did the design on the backs of all of them, but we carved those things 6 feet tall, or I carved them 6 feet tall, and then we took them to a place in Portland called Form 3D, and they scanned them, and then they 3D printed them 6, 9, and 11 feet tall, and then we casted them in bronze, and then they're all lit up at the bottom down there. But that was a really big job to get to do that for the Burke, and it's really traditional. Like if I was to say all the designs were pretty hardcore traditional designs. Still my style, but still traditional. Am I rambling on?
No, I switched to Blue Lake.
Yeah, so this Blue Lake, you know, these are just a couple pictures of some house posts that you could have seen in a plank house. You know, did we ever see a picture of one that looked like that? No, but this is Blue Lake. This is where Lewis and Clark stopped on their way down to the coast. That had those massive, I don't know what I said. I can't remember how long they were. They're maybe 500 feet long. They were just giant, huge houses. In fact, there would be, one of the houses was so big that there was many houses inside of it. And the two particular posts talks about Coyote. You can see Coyote at the top of the right one. He's got his head going into the man. There's the mythology all about Coyote running up and down the river, telling people, you know, how to go about life, things to eat, things not to eat, things that are good, things that are bad. And one of the things that he told the people was to eat grouse soup when you're sick. And so then the next person is, you got a guy there with a bird going into his head, little coyote on his tail. But that was just that was all kind of part of the Lewis and Clark bicentennial in 2005. But those were some nice cedar sticks there.
Jim, do you want to pick up this question?
Yes. Do you use a different finish for the art pieces that will live outdoors?
Yeah, so this particular piece, they had me use 100% natural, biodegradable product. Can't remember the name of it. Timber Tech UV or something. It's made in Portland, but it's really not very good stuff. It didn't last very long. It chips and it peels. I wouldn't recommend using it again. A lot of times I just like to put the benite on there and just let the wood turn gray if you're lucky, or just do what it's going to do. You know, a lot of times the cedar will turn a nice gray silver color, not as much up here as it does down the coast. Another question came in.
How easy or difficult is it to come up with a design? And do you run your designs by anyone for second opinions?
Yeah, so you know, in the very beginning, well, it's always difficult to come up with a new 100% original Columbia River design because there isn't any to look at. There's nobody else doing it. So not like, you know, Northern style art, I can punch in Tlingit mask or Simpson mask or totem pole, and there's 500 examples to go off of. You know, you punch up Columbia River art on a Google search and my artwork comes up, or Tony's or somebody. It's like, so yeah, it was super tough in the beginning, and Tony and I would bounce designs off each other a bunch, and me and Greg, or, you know, at that time I was teaching classes for Grand Ron, sometimes 2 nights a week. Sometimes I'd live down the reservation 5-6 days a week teaching classes. And so we were constantly conversing and talking and sharing. And it was a really big part of my learning, because, you know, you sit down with 10 students, you're going to see 10 different things. And some of the stuff you're going to see you would never have thought of. So it leads you in a bunch of different directions. I mean, if you want to learn something, teach it. It's the best way to learn it. And so I would go down there and, you know, you'd have 10 students sitting around with adses or drawing pictures or whatever. And it just exponentially, my artwork got better and was totally impacted from all the native people that I'd worked with, all the stories that they told, all the elders that would come. And so it was like, you really can't do it unless you hang out with native people to the degree at which I wanted to do it and how I wanted to do it. And so now I don't run my designs by anybody. I don't have to ask for approval. I don't, you know, I care about what the people who are paying me care. You know, I mean, I got a selection committee, you run your designs by them, but if I'm going to do something, I just do it. And I have a pretty good body of work and design. What's the word? You know, you kind of, you know, everybody has a different way they walk. You know, some step on their toes, some step on their heels, and you just kind of develop your own way. Everybody has their own way of writing, spelling, grammar. You know, it's just kind of like that with the carving. This panel is really special here. This is the owl power figure or power board. So there's examples of historic pieces of these flat panels, relief carved flat panels with three-dimensional heads stuck on them. Like this one, for instance, has an owl head on it. And this is a really special piece. So every bit of that paint I ground out of natural pigments that I found from the Columbia River. Well, except for the black. The black I gathered from, I burnt fat wood from fir, old growth fir, and caught it on a mirror and then scraped it off with the razor blade until I had enough to make the black paint. The red was red ochre from the Columbia River, and the blue was blue pigment from the Columbia River that I hand ground it all and painted it all. And it tells the story of owl. So there's a great story on the Columbia River about how all the animals of the world had contributed something to this world, except for owl. He hadn't done any, he hadn't contributed anything. And he got word that eagle was planning to kill him. So owl flies down to a village and he steals a bow and he steals a handful of flint-tipped arrows. That's why he's got those arrows in his talons. And he flies up to the hills and he's like, well, I'm going to practice how to shoot this bow because eagle's going to kill me and I'm going to kill him first. So he's sitting there shooting these arrows into a dirt bank. And when he's done, he walks over, he gathers up all the arrows and he flies off. But unbeknownst to him, one of the flint-tipped arrows shot out a spark and caused a fire burning. Now the people down the village looked up when they saw smoke and they'd never seen it before. Nobody had fire at that point. So they hike up to this smoke and they find this fire burning, and all around the fire are owl tracks. And so there's a story about how owl contributed fire to the people. And so that's kind of what this, and it was a gift, they considered it a gift from the sun. And so you have the owl, he's all smiling because he's contributed fire. He's got the flint-tipped arrows, and then he's got the corona of the sun over his head. But it still all plays in with the power figure with all like the zigzagging lines and the chevrons. And so it's all like Columbia River art. And that's all my own. I've never seen anything like it ever. But from studying little zoomorphic images found on the Columbia River, I came up with that design. And what was really, really cool is that story that I just told you was recorded. Can't remember who recorded it, but a woman named Myrtle Woodcock who lived down in Antuna, I think it is, down by the mouth of the Columbia River, told that story. And I met Myrtle's, it would have been her great granddaughter, or I can't remember what. Somewhere down the line, I met her descendant at the Plank House and got to talk with her firsthand about the story and show her the panel and everything. So that was a really big piece. In fact, the Confederated Tribes of Grand Ronde purchased that, and it's in their museum down on the reservation. So yeah, that was pretty heavy.
Adam, when is a good time? And maybe you're covering this, but there was that earlier question about what is the major distinction between Columbia River style and the more northern coastal styles?
Yeah, well, you know, it was just kind of like what we were looking at, that mask, how it just has that more humanistic look. It has those, you know, big eyebrows, big eyes. It has those big nostrils and nose planes. It's really three-dimensional. right? And it has multiple facial planes. You know, it had a forehead plane, it had a mouth plane, it had a temple plane, it has chin planes, it has eye orb planes, then it has pupil planes. You know, Columbia River art has like 3 facial planes: a forehead, an eye, and a chin. Just basic three of those. It's more, you know, Columbia River art's more ambiguous as to what exactly that animal is that's being portrayed, because we talked a little bit about the spirit power behind it, whereas northwest coast art, you have, you know, you want to tell everybody what it is. Everybody wants to know it. All those masks were basically telling stories of their ancestry and things that had happened. So, you know, the main differences is just one's really ornate and one's really not. One's more, you know, Columbia River art's kind of like organic geometry. You know, it's like the building blocks of a flat carving of Columbia River art is like triangles, rectangles, circles, squares, diamonds. You know, like northern form line has ovoid, it has a primary, it has a secondary, it has a tertiary element. And inside of each one of those elements are different shapes. You know, you got ovoids, you got split U's, you got S shapes, you got tapering L's. And then Coast Salish art, you have like crescents, trigons, and trigons, crescents, and trigons, I think is the other one, circles. So, you know, each tribal style has different elements. And Columbia River, it's kind of hard to say. I mean, you just kind of look at it and you can tell, you know, like there's no ovoids in any of that, just the overall shape, simplistic. You know, even the owl that I'm holding that picture, there's just 3 planes there. There's just like actually I carved a little orb in that one. See, so there I've kind of like made it a little bit more 3-dimensional. It's not just perfectly flat, which you did see some of that too, I guess. There's some antler carvings from Savi's Island that are kind of
So Adam, what
three-dimensional.
are we looking at here?
So this was just another example of like, how do you take the art and produce it in a way that's not going to be offensive to anybody, that's not going to take somebody's power figure or spirit figure that belongs to them or their family and get in trouble. Like I carved a wolf headdress one time, and I had a bunch of Indians get really pissed at me because I said something about it, which I didn't want to say, but the gallery made me. You know, so you got to really be careful. But on the Columbia River, and I don't have one, they used a straight adze instead of a D adze or instead of an elbow adze. I have one somewhere, but it sucks. I don't ever use it. And basically, you would have held on to the same part of wood that the carving iron was hafted to. Like if you remember looking at the elbow adze, the iron was hafted onto a different piece of wood than the one you actually had your hand on. It had the crotch of the tree that stuck out, and then the D adze, you were holding on to like the D part. This one, you would have had the blade come straight out of the bottom. And so what I did was I just said, and there's examples of these straight adzes in museums. I thought, well, let's just carve a giant straight adze and make it an art piece. And then let's just tell the story about owl and fire. And so basically that's just a giant straight adze, and with the owl on top, you know, he's got his ribs on the side. He's got the consent or the triangles in a circle pattern, like a star or like a sun. And then he's got little wings. And then down at the bottom's a little human effigy that, you know, talks about people finding the fire. And then there's a fake blade, and then there's a wooden blade, and the blade actually makes the torso of the little human figure at the bottom. So that's basically all that is. It's just a safe way to carve Columbia River art and not get in trouble, because an adze wasn't a ceremonial item. The owl isn't a crest that belongs to anybody. It's not anybody's personal tamanawas. It's the mythology, you know, you can read about him. And so I just decided that's what I was going to do. Pretty much what it is.
In the I think in the January, we have one question about recommended references for learning more about this. And of
Yeah.
course, the January issue of our newsletter covers, is a general article, probably about 6-7 pages long, on Northwest coastal art. But it ends with a list of potential references. Are there references that you think would point out as the best ones?
Just some books that people could read on Northwest Coast or on Columbia River art, or just Columbia River people and Chinook people in general.
I would say let's focus on the art, the carving right now.
Well, the only book that I don't know, let me grab it here. The only book that hints at any of the art form at all is the Chinookan people of the lower Columbia River. And me and Tony wrote the article or the chapter in it on art, and it kind of just describes some pieces and runs through somewhat of some kind of art description. The other book is the catalog from the Portland Art Museum. Portland Art Museum had a great show. Can't remember the guy's name. It was the curator back then. He traveled around. See, here's the deal with Columbia River art, and it's why it's so hard to find references of it or to even see it. I mean, the Portland Art Museum would be a great place to go. They have a pretty good collection. The museum up at Laluska's in Ariel has a pretty good Columbia River piece. But in the 50s and 60s, the Oregon Archaeological Society would sponsor digs. So I could, or you could, anybody could show up to an archaeological site for 75 cents a square foot. They could buy a plot of land and they could dig and retain any artifacts that they found. Well, you got hundreds of people going out and doing that, finding all these kinds of hardcore bone effigies and carvings of all kinds, and then taking them home. Lord knows where they are now. The second problem is almost all the land where all the plank houses were and where all the natives hung out, like on Savi's Island, they all got plowed by potato farms and corn farms, and all these artifacts reside in people's private collections in their basements and things, and they won't let anybody see them. So you have this whole art form that just kind of like, it's just really weird how this, I mean, you could go dig artifacts and keep them. I mean, that just sounds crazy. And then the farmers would dig them up and throw them in their basement, like the Reeder farm. The Reeders have this giant, massive collection of Columbia River art, but then they won't let anybody see it. They won't do anything with it. Well, the curator for the Portland Art Museum somehow talked his way into getting some of these, and he put together a really good collection of Columbia River art, and I think it's called People of the River, and it's just a catalog, and it's the best book. The descriptions are horrible, but the pictures are awesome if you want to just look at really good Columbia River art, like from the Columbia River, like right here where we live. Did that answer your question?
Adam, I'm going to move you along. So I switched slides. We got about 25 minutes left, and we have some
I'm just
slides
getting
to go
warmed
through.
up.
I know. Well, you're welcome to keep going, but let's kind of get through the slides, and then we can keep on the conversation.
Yeah.
I'm at the Trail of Tears.
Okay, so the Trail of Tears. This is an example of when I was living down on the reservation. I lived down there in a camper, and I was a major part of the recovery program down there. And so I would go down on the weekends, and then I would go down and stay, up to a week or two sometimes. And I designed this pole, and they got a log, and then I would have all the people that were living at the recovery house cycle through there and work and carve with me as a means to, get them doing something, get their mind off whatever else. And there was several other people that came down there. So it was a big joint carving project, and it just references the Trail of Tears that they all had, that their ancestors all had to march to come down or to get to the reservation there. And so basically you just have a bunch of heads, a bunch of Columbia River Chinook style, 3 facial plane heads, and the tears are cascading from the chief at the top that's got the coyotes on the side, and he's got a little spirit power in his headdress, and the tears go from one head down to the next. But that was a great project down there. I think it took, I don't know, 6 months or so, because I wasn't there all the time, but quite a bit to get that project done. And there was probably, probably a dozen people that actually came down and worked on it, but there was probably a good core group of about 6 guys and two women. I think we're down there, Dolores and
where is this
Debbie-
located,
Debbie.
Adam?
So that's now standing next to their longhouse on the reservation. You can kind of see that shed roof coming down there. That's
I'm sorry, which reservation and where?
Confederated Tribes of Grand Ronde down by Lincoln City.
Yep.
Spirit Mountain Casino.
And about how tall is it?
Man, I remember that thing was 30 feet or 40 feet tall. Pretty
It's
tall.
big. It's big.
Started out as a log, it's a full cedar log, and we faceted it. Okay, so this is another house post. A woman commissioned me to carve for her studio, and she was a videographer. She did some great videos for HBO and things, and so she wanted to be on the front of the pole with their arms out, and then all the men and the women there that are painted kind of represent all the people that she's interviewed and done movies of. And then they each had like a animal that they liked for their totem, and one of their sons' name was Red, like a salmon red, R-E-D-D, which is a salmon makes its nest in the gravel. They call it a red. So she wanted to have like salmon swimming up the bottom of the pole, and then you can see there's a little red face there that represents one of the eggs of the nest. And so they got these salmon that are swimming up the pole. So this is kind of like a contemporary traditional carving. You can see that top face is real traditional, and then the salmon are kind of coasty, Salishy looking. They're still native, and then you get the bands of triangles and whatnot. But that stood up inside her art studio. How do you erect totem poles? That one was kind of crazy because it was 2 pieces, and it wrapped a steel 4x4 column, and just a couple of guys went in there. We lifted it up. I've lifted totem poles or totems with cranes, just a crane, or a bunch of guys and girls push it up, but usually you just get a crane to set them.
And do you set them in concrete or in the ground?
No, you always want to set them about an inch or 2 above ground so that they don't wick moisture up. If you set it in concrete or set it in dirt, it's just like cedar is just like a big sponge. It's just going to suck up water and eventually rot. It was crazy. There's those giant totem poles where they built that new McMinimans on Columbia River. Chief Laluska carved it. It was the largest tallest totem pole in the world. It was 100 feet long. Well, they erected it, and then they poured concrete all underneath it, or they set it on concrete. And that thing is so rotten now that when somebody pushed a hole in the bottom of it or something, the guy said like 200 gallons of water spilled out of it, but it had just sucked water up from the concrete down from the top, and it was all rotted out. It was a big nightmare. But now you always want wood to be able to breathe. If wood can breathe, it's going to last a lot longer. So this is a story pole. So this is different from a totem pole in that all the little creatures, all the animals, they're not interlocking, right? Like a totem pole, you'll have like a bear, and then you'll have like maybe an eagle's wings wrapped around it, or a frog's legs around its neck with its head on top of the bear. Like a totem pole, everything's interlocking, and a lot of times it tells people's origin myths of how they descended to earth or how they got there, or they also have totem poles that tell stories that had happened, mythology that had happened, or they have mortuary poles. Story pole, this is the sky world pole for Puyallup, the tribe contacted me and commissioned me to carve this for their Emerald Queen Casino. Sean Peterson, who's a Puyallup artist, designed it. That log was 35 feet long. It weighed 3 tons, 6,000 pounds. When I got it, I think, is that 3 tons, right? It was insane, but it tells the story of Blue Jay down at the bottom with that red band getting a song and flying up into the sky after eagle couldn't get it and elk couldn't get it, and then at the top is the sun. And so I kind of carved a Columbia River style sun, and then we just carved eyes in it, so it was kind of like a little bit of me in there. And you got the 2 sky hunters in the canoe that were hunting the elk. So that's kind of how the story goes with that. And that was big.
Did you carve this in your studio or up there?
And so I carved that outside in that carport area and moved it around with high lift jacks and fulcrums and car jacks, and a log truck loader pushed it in there with the boom, but it was huge. So yeah, I do a lot of rattles. That's a West Coast style, like macaw style rattle with the wolf on its back. They have a particular style of rattle called it's a grouse rattle, and it's usually a bird head. And so this time, instead of carving it into a bird head, I carved it into a wolf, because there's a lot of wolf ceremonies, secret societies and things up there with the macaw. So that's just an example of a globular rattle with a head on it and a coyote or a wolf on its back. So this is a lot like the mask that I showed you here that I've been working on, same style Bella Coola. That's a sea carpenter. Like there's these great, the Bella Coola believed that there was these 4 twin brothers, and they carved all the animals in the world. They built one of the brothers would carve them, the other one would paint them, and the other one would turn them to life. And there's stories about building the sky, and anyways, this one kind of just represented, got a lot of seashells and things on there, just sea creatures and things like that from the ocean.
Bella Coola, that is in Vancouver, Canada, right? And so we're
Yeah,
talking
so that's
about
a
more
little bit
North Coast.
Little bit more north of Vancouver. So it's up the Dean and Burt Channel. They're interior and they're Salish speaking. This particular style was Dwayne Pascoe's claim to fame. Like that's his main style, and that's what he taught me. That's what I learned on. So I carved the most Bella Coola stuff other than Columbia River. And these are, so, the far left mask is the Colas mask. That's the brother of the Thunderbird. And then the middle is the Carpenter brother. And then the other bird is an eagle. And then the far right is the Simpson, just a portrait mask. And these all went up on the Muckleshoot Indian Reservation they were building a big trailer park up there. And then they had a clubhouse with like a bull or what do you call it? Pool tables and things in there. And so they decorated it with a bunch of different masks. That was a long one. That's a Gomaquay mask. So that's the king of the undersea world. That's why he's kind of got like octopus tentacles, and then those sea urchins. You see those sea urchins carved on masks a lot. It's a Bella Coola style. So this is that wolf mask that actually I got in trouble by one Indian. I don't know why he got so pissed, but I was working with Macaw Elder from Nia Bay, and he was teaching me how to carve these Henekitsa masks, they call them, and then these wolf masks. And they were worn on the headdress, and then they would be danced. So the man's face would be protruding from the bottom, so it wouldn't cover his face. It would be from the forehead up. Well, anyways, I wanted to carve one of these things for the Stonington Gallery, and natives are always putting things on heads of stuff, and so I thought it would be really cool to carve this macaw or Nootka style canoe on it, and then do a West Coast style painting on it. Well, the gallery always wants some story behind it. I've never actually really tell much of a story behind it, because then you're actually like, you're making it pertain to something rather than just art. Like art can just represent itself. So anyways, there was a really famous canoe carver called Young Doctor, who carved a bunch of canoes in Neah Bay. And so I was like, well, I'll just call it the Young Doctor mask or headdress and honor Young Doctor. This awesome. And I wrote this little thing about Young Doctor being this really good canoe carver. Anyways, this guy got really pissed because he wasn't even native. His wife was native. He was a white guy. His wife was native, and he got all pissed at me for doing it. But anyways, we're friends now. But so you can get really edgy about stuff. But I had every right to carve the mask. I was given the right to carve the mask by an elder, and the elder was like, who cares what he says? He's not even a native guy. So it's, I don't know. You got to kind of be careful. So like a lot of times I just stay really careful with things when I do Northern style stuff, because I don't know. I quit pursuing native or Northern style art once I started doing Columbia River, because it's where I live and where I'm from, and it's where the people are. Like, I know the people, I know the culture. I don't fear ever getting in trouble, you know. I've all their kids, I grew up with them. So, this is a headdress, a Stonkia headdress. It was the myth-age coyote that ran all up and down the Columbia River. So this is another example of just the natives, accepting me and accepting my work, because I carved that. That's Bobby Merciers, who's their cultural expert for the tribe, and was the skipper of that canoe. Stonkia is the canoe that she's in, and they use my art and their regalias for their dances and all the time. And so that's just her wearing a headdress I made, which I'd never seen before. And I thought, well, West Coast people do it. They probably would have seen somebody up north do it, because everybody was always borrowing and sharing. And so that was that.
That was the last slide, but it's not the end of the conversation
Oh
necessarily.
yeah, okay.
So I just
You
want
bet.
to just use that as a pause, because we're kind of getting a little bit to the end. This is, again, more opportunity for asking questions, making comments, if anybody has any.
So Larry asked if you carve articulated masks.
Yeah, I've carved a bunch of raven masks with articulated beaks and things. I've never done a transformation mask yet that opens up. I quit carving masks for a long time because it took all my energy to try and develop this Columbia River art. And so that mask that I showed you today is the first one I've carved in a year. I haven't had time to do anything I want to do, really. I mean, I want to do it, but I have to work.
So Adam, for carvers here who would like to dabble in things like totem poles and masks and things that might be inspired by Northwest coastal art, it struck me in the latest issue of Chip Chats, on the cover, they had a totem pole carved by a gentleman, and it featured, and he was out in the Midwest somewhere. And since talking with you, I'm looking at that totem pole and I'm saying, oh, this is bogus. This can't be. I'm kind of dissing it. But I mean, what's the limit on cultural appropriation for somebody like most of us who are not natives, who are not going to learn a lot about the culture? I mean, we can carve a totem pole that might represent something that's personal to us without it being considered cultural appropriation, can't we?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just all about how you talk about it. If you carve a totem pole, don't sit there and say, yeah, this is a traditionally carved Northwest Coast Tlingit style or colloquial style or Tsimshian style pole. Just say, yeah, I just was inspired and carved a totem pole, but it's all my own designs. I'm not claiming it to be Northwest Coast Indian art, because for it to be Northwest Coast Indian art, it would have to hold true to all those elements that make that up and that style, right?
Yeah.
So like, does that answer your question? Like,
yeah, it does. And so we can do something, adapt this style or adapt what we see here to maybe do on our own family history. I think Larry has in the garage a totem that was done by different carvers from the Western Carvers Guild, a small pole type device, but there's a lot of symbolism in there that people threw together.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, a totem pole can be, yeah, anything really. It's just how you, like there was a gentleman down in in McMinnville, and I was going down there working all the time, and these guys were always telling me about this guy in Mac that just carves these killer totem poles and these killer rattles and killer masks, and how great he was and how much he sells them for. And that went on for a while, and finally I was like, well, where's it at? I want to go meet this guy. This sounds great. And I drove to the gallery in McMinnville, and the guy had been importing Indonesian carved Northwest Coast Indian art, which is really a big thing. And the carving was really great, but the proportions were horrible. I mean, the proportions were so far off that it distorted the imagery itself. When I went back to those guys, I said, that's a bogus, dude. There's no way that is. And they were like, no way, you don't know. I said, what? And I said, well, look at it. And I showed them some stuff, like some museum pictures, and like, you got to study it. Like, you got to look at it. You got to immerse yourself into it. And they ended up running that guy out of town. And I've seen that Indonesian carved stuff, and the carving is great. Like, their carving is crisp and clean, but the forms and the proportions are just all wrong, because the people in Indonesia or wherever they're carving that, they're just looking at pictures in the book and they're not actually holding it. Like, if you want to carve Northwest Coast Indian art, go to the museums and look at it. Like, I traveled to every museum from, Portland to Alaska. I went into the basement, held them, went to every artist I could find, you know what I'm saying? Like, that's how you develop the ability to accurately depict Northwest Coast Indian art in your carving. I don't know, I kind of got off on a tangent there.
So Adam, there have been a lot of accolades through this in the chat room, with the final one maybe being from Heidi McNamee saying, thank you. Your work is inspiring and I learned a lot. Larry, are there things that you want to add to this, or
Yeah,
more
I'll just wrap it up. And first of all, thank you. Thank you, Adam. Thank you for the time, for meeting with us 3 months ago and for doing this.
Yeah, it's my pleasure.
Yeah, I hope this is the beginning and for a journey. But there's 3 things I'd like to mention. Tony Rizzuto, who's a member and my predecessor, is the leader of the group, lost 7 Port Orford cedars in a storm in December. He's giving away Port Orford wood. Now it's been bucked up to about 16-inch long. As I recall, Tony, it's in the area of 10 to 15-inch diameter kind of logs. So if you Adam, or if anybody listening here wants some free Port Orford cedar, he would like to move it out of his backyard. Lives in Tigard, about a mile from the woodcraft store there.
That could be fun.
Yeah, so it's relatively green. The second is that I'm going to put an interest list on the website. And an interest list is a place for people to express their desire to learn more, participate more, maybe take a class, maybe have a seminar, maybe do something. So once we're done tonight, this recording takes about 24 hours to get percolated from Zoom through Google and back up to the website. And once it's available to view, I will put out an email to everybody that's registered, and I'll give you a pointer to the recording and also a pointer to the interest list. Okay. So you could, if people here listening or watching the video can figure out where you want to go, if anything, and help us deal with that. And the final comment is that when I talked to Adam a couple of days ago, and I said, oh, by the way, we're doing this gathering of the guilds program the first weekend in May. We're having a store. Would you have anything that you would like to sell? And he said, yeah, I think maybe I got a few things. So he's thinking about that. And so there may be an opportunity at the gathering the guilds to see a few of his pieces that will be for sale. And I'm not going to put words in your mouth, Adam, but there's a possibility that could happen. So the other opportunities, obviously, figure out how to break into busy schedule, and we'll schedule a time. Another possibility that we have besides a class would be to do a studio visit, a talk, or, you know, a couple hour visit, a lunch on the picnic, if that's a box lunch on your lawn. Lives in a beautiful setting, you know, about I don't know, about 5 minutes south of downtown the center, which is not very far from I-5. So there may be a variety of opportunities to see things and get up close and
Yeah.
personal.
Yeah, it'd be a good time here in the next month or two, because I'm going to start carving those giant power figures for the city of Seattle. So those will be kind of something fun, cool to look at. Lots of good wood and chips flying everywhere.
Yeah, and those are going to end up on the waterfront, as I recall that you said.
They're going to be down on the new waterfront enhancement right there by Pike Street Market.
Yeah, okay. Well, let's all give Adam a virtual applause, a stand-up ovation for taking this time. I really appreciate it. And thanks for everybody's attention and paying attention. And Adam, is your daughter still there or not? Tell her thank you.
No, she bailed. She's heard me say all this stuff a million times.
She got work to do too. Huh?
Old school.
Okay, everybody. Well, we'll call it quits. Welcome.
Thank you very much.
Tom to the board. We'll stay in touch.
My pleasure. Anytime.
Thank you.
Thanks.
You're welcome.
Thanks, Adam.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Adam.
You bet. My
Okay.
pleasure. Is that it?
Well,
How many people were there?
Well, there was a high water mark. I saw 36.
Wow.
And by the time we
Pretty
left,
good.
it was kind of it got down to 27, but it
Got
stayed
kinda
above,
tired.
well, it gets for whatever reason, right? But I think, you know, nobody ever stays, the whole crowd never stays for the entire time, but I would say you had their attention. I thought it went really well. I thought you really
Cool.
did a nice job. And thankfully the technology worked and the microphones worked, I think. As far as I was concerned, it all worked.
Sounded good.
Yeah.
My camera's not showing anybody. Oh, there you are.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, if anybody's interested in workshops, or you guys want to do a workshop or tool making, you know, we can do that. You know, whatever. There's plenty of room. And
Adam, you mentioned that you saw some brochures and catalogs that had great pictures, but horrible words. Would you be interested in reworking the words?
in what?
Well, working with me to give a better narrative of those catalogs that you said had excellent examples.
Oh, the one that was at the People of the River book.
Yeah, I think that's the one.
Yeah. Sure. I mean, I would love to sit down and talk about art anytime. If you're writing a book or you want to redo it.
I have no idea. I'm a writer. I'm an editor.
Oh yeah. Oh,
and,
okay.
So Tom is the newsletter editor now. So he's got
Oh,
and he's a professional editor and got a huge background.
Oh, awesome. Yeah, anytime.
So I'll try and locate that that original brochure. But yeah, I think well, Larry has my email address, and maybe we can start corresponding and work on that. Because I
Do
think
some more descriptive terms. They were just so, if I remember right, they were just so vague that it was like, well, you know, say, well, what is that?
My professional life has been taking people's information and putting it in an organized fashion so that other people can learn and understand. So
Yeah.
it sounded like a great opportunity to, you have a lot of knowledge, I can tell by just offhand things you should say about this or that. And then be able to have enough time to just say, okay, here's an example of this. This is what you should look at. This is typical. This is unusual. And really give a description of those.
It would be cool to
works.
put together a little catalog or something of our own. I've always wanted to do, nobody's ever done any sort of a booklet on any of the contemporary Columbia River art that's going on, and not just mine. I mean, there's other guys that are doing it.
Okay.
It might be fun to look to do that. I
Yeah.
don't know. I'm just, you'll get me all thinking about all kinds of stuff, but I really appreciated getting this opportunity because it made me try, you know, you forget so much, you know, you say it and you do it and you read it and you live it. And then pretty soon it's just like, you start doing it and you don't keep up on your research and your dates or name, you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
it was really good for me to go back and revisit a lot of that stuff and think about it again. I'd told those stories and all that stuff so many times in the beginning, and then you just kind of get in the grind of carving, and it's been kind of a rough road, really. It's been great. It's been, if I had just been another Northern style artist, I don't know if I would have been able to make a living at it, but doing something that nobody else was doing, you know, you fill that niche, but then at the same time, everybody was telling you you're crazy, that you're not even doing what was done, you know, it's kind of interesting. And you never find anybody that really wants to talk about it. My wife's so sick of it. My kids are sick of it. Nobody wants to talk about it anymore. It's like, yeah, we've heard that forever.
Well, you'll find a good pair of ears with me. I'd be
Yeah.
happy to hear it.
Well, anytime you want to come and hang out in the shop, like I sit out here and carve, and if you don't mind me not looking at you while I'm talking, you can sit here all day long. I could sit here and carve and talk. That's what I tell everybody. That I'm not being rude. I just got to work, but I love listening and talking because I talk to myself and nobody else is here.
I have this fantasy that Oregon Art Beat will discover the recorded program on our website, or someone here will tell them about it, and they'll invite Adam to be a presenter on their TV program, and it'll be blasted all over the world.
Yeah, I've always wondered why I've never got that opportunity before, but
Yeah.
I've just been so horrible at self-promotion. I just don't.
Well, you need a fan. You need a fan. You need a little bit of luck, right? We need someone in our midst that says, you know, let's figure this out. It's absolutely amazing when you almost think of something. You know, here we have about half a dozen people listening, and they know 10 or 20 people, and all of a sudden ideas
Yeah.
just kind of have a life of their own. John Sutter, who is Mac Sutter's son, it's a story that's got a happy ending. That Mac died in 1997, taught carving for 40 years, was a principal instigator of getting the carving club going. And John now is 78 years old and ends up with 50 of his dad's priceless carvings and doesn't know what to do with them. And, you know, after 5 years, he finally figured out that, you know, that we can figure this out. So we made an introduction through the Oregon Historical Society, through yet another carver. And the end result is all of that collection is being absorbed by the Oregon Historical Society. And it'll be archived forever in their massive,
Awesome,
air-conditioned, fireproof archive in Gresham. You know, you're too young to have your stuff archived yet, but, you know, video websites can live forever. I mean, in a sense that the stuff will get repurposed, as do photographs. So, you know, I think you have a powerful story. I think you earned the right to be propagated and documented and folded, mutilated, and spindled, as they said in the old days, right? For being moving forward.
Well, it really, you know, just aside from me and, you know, what I've done, just the fact that this art form had just like stopped and nobody knew about it. Nobody did it. I mean, the native knew about it. Some people knew about it. But what I'm saying is it's just like to see where it's come from 2005 when me and Tony did those plank houses to now, it's like, it's just really amazing. And it hasn't just been me. It's been the native people accepting me and working with me. And because it was like a partnership. We both learned from each other, you know, like you go down there and you'd listen to those elders and all those native people, they had this innate ability to come up with native design. Now, maybe their drawing wasn't very good and they didn't have the right elements in there, but their concepts and their ideas were just awesome because they grew up listening to all that stuff. You know, that's what they've been told forever. And to be able to see all that go down, and it really has. It's just been an amazing journey it's been about 18 years, really, the heart of it. And we're the the Chinook are almost, they've almost been recognized several times, but it really, Columbia River art should be celebrated all over our cities and all over our streets. You know, you go to Seattle, you go to Vancouver, you go up to Alaska, there's totem poles, there's, form line design, and you just see it everywhere. And the indigenous art of this area just has never been celebrated by any of, city officials or whoever makes those decisions. It's just crazy to me that it's just never been, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Yeah. The only place you'd ever see that was up at Laluska.
And the Laluska was carving quaggle stuff.
Yeah, he was
Vancouver
not.
Island.
He wasn't doing Columbia River, for Chinook artwork.
Right. Yeah, it's really a strange deal, but so much of it was just dug up and taken, and then so much of it was inundated with dams and then burnt villages. It was just like it really got hit hard. It's taken 200 years to come back, or whatever it is. Anyway, I'll sit here and ramble on about whatever, but I've had fun.
Okay,
Anybody else?
I'm gonna
Good.
pull the plug. I'll pull the plug. Nobody wants to say goodbye. Everybody has no place to go. The bar's not closed yet, and
Well, come and hang out at any time. I'm
we'll
always
have a
here.
virtual virtual drink. Okay, Alan, Adam, again, thanks a lot. I really appreciate it.
All right.
We'll take care.
See you all
Take care,
later.
everybody.
Thanks.
We'll see you.
Yep. Bye-bye.